Great. So I believe we can go ahead and start, yes?
Yes, I think we can.
I think we're just waiting for everyone to join. Hello, Rosalind.
Hi, how are you?
Hello, Nesh. Great. So I'm trying to make sure everyone is joining, and then give us a minute and we will get started. I think we might be missing a few more folks. Pascal, Rahel, Gerald James.
I'm Jarrell James. Neshkade is just my Ethiopian name.
Oh, okay, got it. Okay. Great. So I think we might as well go ahead and get started. I know other people will join momentarily throughout. And I'm actually very excited when Kume Chipsa of East Africa Blockchain and Afro Valley suggested that I help moderate this conference. So it was a sort of a last minute request because I know there was some shuffling around as we tried to get people to join this panel. So I wanted to thank all of you in advance for taking the time. Hopefully all of us can learn from each other, and we can share some of our thoughts and learn from all the other folks who are listening in today. I wanted to very, very quickly just introduce the folks who are on the panel right now. And again, just a very little bit, and I think as we start asking questions, we can, you can start to share a little bit more about the details of your background. So, and then start to kind of share some of your experiences. I think that will help. So Desiree, thank you for joining. Desiree is an advisor at the Africa Blockchain Institute. And yes, there's a little bit of an echo, I know. He's a technologist and physicist who's really, I think, worked across multiple verticals with AI, blockchain, quantum, and AR technology. So really a confluence of a lot of the modern technologies that are intersecting today and how we need to leverage those. And hopefully, I think, Desiree, I'm excited to kind of be speaking with you again here.
Thank you very much, Ravi.
And then Silas is with the IBM Innovation Center. He's the leader here in East Africa, and extensive experience with designing and implementing solutions across, again, a lot of key major technologies, CRM, business intelligence, supply chains, knowledge management systems, which are things that we continue to need to evolve for building really productivity across the board. Then Nesh Gide is...
Just, sorry, just a clarification. I was in IBM.
Oh, okay. Right. Yes. So Gerald James is a partner at, Nesh Gide is a partner at C-Lab, and they've worked extensively with us at the Blockchain for Social Impact. So it's wonderful to be with you again. And he's really worked on negotiating international partnerships, new markets for kind of STEM software, product development and education across, really across Africa, Asia, and the Americas, which is great. And then Rosalind, thank you, is an economist, youth mentor, and blockchain strategy consultant, and a director of the growth and user acquisitions at Pesabase, a payments and remittance solutions provider in Africa. So I'm looking forward to hearing from you. She's spoken a lot at many major conferences and media events on innovation and adoption of emerging technologies, and I think that will be critical to the conversation we're going to have today on really the digital transformation that's happening globally, and how do we ensure we partake in that efficiently. Rahel is the founder and CEO of the R&D Group, which provides support for is a pioneer in the service and export sector in Ethiopia. And so really focused on job and economic growth, and is also a board member at the African Diaspora Policy Center. So as well as the WBF Angel Investment Fund. So Rahel, I think everyone here will look forward to your feedback as well. Did I capture everyone?
Prahanu? Yes.
Prahanu is founder of the, and forgive me if I'm mispronouncing it, the Dengine Technology Solutions that leverages high quality technology talent to address the talent problem, something I'm also very interested in what I'm doing. And so I think that becomes critical for us to understand how do we efficiently leverage and train and continue to educate our workforce. He's also a senior manager at Ernst & Young. I am based out of New York, Ravi Srinivasan. I have over 20, 25 years of experience in overall enterprise technology and consulting. I'm running projects today in enterprise cloud procurement, public cloud procurement on AWS and Azure, digital transformation and governance. I'm on the board of Blockchain for Social Impact, which is a global organization based here in New York that focuses on really leveraging a lot of the blockchain technologies today, including supply chain capabilities, identity, etc., for social impact purposes, really focusing on the UN Millennium and Sustainable Development Goals. I've in my prior career, I've co-founded a couple of businesses in the outsourcing space in India, which we've sold in the past with large offshore operations. I've led transformation efforts at Bridgewater, which is a large hedge fund here, and then also worked in the technology startup space as well, advising companies more recently. So, did I miss anyone, or have I captured everyone here? Great. So, I think we wanted to talk about just innovation, employment, education, and really the intersection as we transform into this this digital environment. So really, as jobs are moving towards, in many cases, a gig economy, which in some cases is there, in some cases I think it's evolved beyond that. There's a strong focus in really making a difference to society through innovation, digital hubs, and access to the latest digital technologies is becoming imperative as an infrastructure component to ensure that there's equitable development across different parts of the world, urban areas and rural areas as well. And I think I wanted to start off first talking about education. So how are we seeing education evolving, if at all, especially in Africa, in Eastern Africa in particular? How are we preparing youth for the global economy? And this is a combination not just of what we're learning today about, or maybe through this forum, about blockchain and decentralized finance and digital currencies, all of which is very exciting, but just overall digital skills, digital education training, and then the related training around the soft skills around communication, et cetera. Are we preparing our youth effectively for today's globalized economy? Or are there gaps there? Are private sector folks filling that gap? So I wanted to start with that topic. And I know I raised a few points there, but perhaps you could all kind of educate and guide myself and others on that as well. So Desiree, I don't know if you were in a position to share some initial thoughts.
Maybe I can share the concept of what we call knowledge-based society. Back
Yes.
in 2018-19, I was working in Rwanda, and there I've had the opportunity to read extensively the country vision. So that was back then 2020. Then it's been extended to something called the National Strategy of Transformation. And bottom line is that the country is aiming at reaching what we call the knowledge-based society that is based on education, technology, knowledge as a whole. And this is promoted and implemented by government. But at the same time, the goal is to have every actor in the society to be contributing for this goal. And I believe that this kind of initiative will and should come from public sponsors and support, but every actor of the society as a whole should be involved. You know the story of the country, so they've had to think from bottom, from the ground up, a strategy that will aim at making the African people in general and Rwandese people in particular leveraging on technology, innovation for entrepreneurship and so on. So what has been applied there, I believe, could be replicated in many ways among many other African countries. Trying to take what works from the private sector and from efficient, driven organization, but trying to embed into it the social aspect of it, regardless of the technology, regardless of the method. So this is just a general holistic comment that I'm making it. And we can dive into details then regarding blockchain and AI and so on. You're on mute, Ravi.
Thank you. I think that's great in terms of what that ideal environment looks like. And in terms of, I think, the comments that people are making, I'm happy to be as a moderator, but I think all of you probably have wonderful points that you can convey directly. So please feel free to jump in and I'll manage it from a time standpoint. Rahel, I would love to get your thoughts. I know it sounds like you've been focused a lot on kind of jobs and economic growth and what the ultimate impact is of folks entering the workforce. And then I think we can then tie that back to how the education and training environment needs to evolve or what it is today.
Thank you, Ravi. Well, I think it's a very, just to start with, actually, I had an interview yesterday about social entrepreneurship and the impact of private sectors to drive change for Africa from the Netherlands. And so I was talking about, the education, and we are not serving the need of the private sector. And the woman who was interviewing me is a professor at the University of in Uganda. She said, in the 80s, when I was going to school, we were saying the same thing. We were saying we are not educating our youth to be fitting into the society. We are not future protected, and we are not practical enough. And she said, so what had happened? What had changed? What's new? And I unfortunately had to repeat what she said, is that we do not prepare our youth. I cannot talk about Africa, obviously, most of us do know Africa as a continent of 54 countries. So from Ethiopia, the youth that come into the market are educated in terms of IQ, but not practically employable. So what they miss is very simplistic things that are almost everyday working skills in developed countries, like creative thinking, problem solving, emotional intelligence. Topics which are really very important are not even taken into consideration when educating our youth. So that's where actually I think there is a big gap to prepare our youth into becoming good citizens to fit into organization that need really creative thinkers. What I do see is that the liberalization of digitalization, obviously still for very limited people, is allowing people to think outside of the horizon. So people are reading more, people are connected more. So this offers a bit different way of thinking for youth if it's organized well. But the education institution, they still have to consider really looking into what is happening in the market. Whatever skill you learn now is really absolute in 10 years. So how do we continuously evolve, the development of the youth is very important concept, really not thinking in a rigid way of curricula, but thinking outside of the box and allowing people to do internships and more practical experience than really creating the intelligent people that are considered, the elite, where I see a change is where we actually focus practical education and considering skills that are needed in workforce. I hope I summarized some of.
Yes.
Yeah,
thank you, Rahel.
Yeah, I can take it from there. I think Rahel has echoed quite a bit of stuff that's happening in East Africa, and particularly in Kenya as well. Yes, we do have a lot of educated folk, but there's specific skills that they're missing. The soft skills, the teamwork dynamics, the critical thinking, and all that is a challenge. What we are seeing as well is emergence of sort of like group learning kind of scenarios, which are helping some of these newly graduates be able to be assimilated into the workplace organization. So I'm in a lot of those groups where we start doing a lot of presentation type stuff, critical thinking, and you still always see that there's some challenges, and there's a need for a lot of mentorship, especially from the private sector, and working together with these sort of like virtual and physical hubs to be able to bring up the skills.
Yeah, I want to echo, but also provide some context from what I've seen in both West and East Africa. We do a lot of stuff in Nigeria and Ghana, as well as Uganda, Kenya, and now starting to push a little bit into Ethiopia, which is my home country. And I would say the one thing that has given me a lot of hope and a lot of drive to help out in any way I can is seeing that there is this desire to develop those soft skills or develop those types of employable skills. And as you say, like to create teamwork. And I've seen quite a few of the youth start to throw hackathons and try and pull in mentors and try and pull in people because they know that they need to have that menteeship and to develop those skills. So I'm actually quite excited for the future and what it holds when it comes to just the actual youth training themselves to some extent, sourcing their own guidance and creating those developed opportunities. I know at least in multiple countries now, I've watched hackathons actually direct whole like future career paths for quite a few of the youth. So I don't want us to count out the actual youth to develop their own skill sets.
Yeah, and actually in building upon that, another thing I've observed within the East and West African landscape is that young people are increasingly questioning the path to economic empowerment / freedom / liberty, because if your peer who did not go to school or did not have any formal learning is earning 5 times as much as what you thought would be your starting salary in an established learning institution, you're actually left to question then, should you go for structured learning? Should you go for institutional learning? And I think it's as Rahel pointed out that, we have this constant exposure to what our peers are doing, this constant exposure to what's going on in the East, in the West, in the North and the South, right? So we find ourselves in a scenario whereby people are actually questioning the fact that should we address the skills gap? Should we address the income gap, or should we address now, as you're saying, these scenarios of group learning whereby people are going to learn on the job, therefore learning is shifting therefore to the workspace and not pre-workspace setups.
And if I may add, my experience had been based on Ethiopia. I know Africa is a huge continent. What I'm seeing is, the youth lacks the exposure and any information about what's expected in the workforce, all the soft skills, all the critical thinking, and how to actually work in an organized manner. While you could do it, even if it's your own company you founded or you're employed at somebody else's company, there's a need to have an organized, structured way of working, and not just as a hobby, as a part-time effort. So some of the soft skills that are needed to work together, some of the critical thinking, that's kind of missing. And my understanding is that's for lack of exposure and lack of understanding of expertise. Somebody would be, giving them insight into what's expected when you go out there. So, and I think that's partly because there's not as many, at least in Ethiopia's sense, as many private sector jobs that the youth could relate to. A lot of the jobs you see out there are government jobs, and some of the traditional businesses, traditional jobs that the youth are not relating to. So there's a need to kind of familiarize them, set expectations. I don't know, maybe it's in an informal channels that we could do that, but that lack of awareness, that lack of exposure, and understanding of what's expected when they leave the schools and join the workforce, I think that's kind of causing a challenge. That's been my experience so far, and hopefully, there's an opportunity to close that gap.
May I just, if I would just like to give some, I would say, second thought about the hackathon and competition and so on. I'm a huge fan of it. I've done actually dozens of it. And I try to apply it also in the context of some African countries where I've been living and working. But I would maybe ask for us to be very cautious in the way we're implementing it. Because what I've been seeing happening these past few years is using hackathon as a way to solve problems that should normally leverage on the skills of experts or companies, private sectors, and professionals. So we have both public and private sector organizing hackathon for the youth to solve a complex challenge with the cost of Coca-Cola, hamburgers, pizzas, and so on. And I believe that there should be more emphasis on the private sector to come on board and giving an exit strategy to this hackathon. What I've been trying to work on, and that's what I do now in my full-time job, is trying to help entrepreneurs going beyond the hackathon in the competition. What's after? What do you do once you won your competition and get the goodies and the PR and so on? We should build further on. Trying to connect it to public, private sector to build create some real job, as my colleague rightly said. Because on one hand, we're telling build your company because that's the future of Africa. But on the other hand, we're not giving them enough connections or possibility to find customers, to find markets, to bring the product to the end of the user. And we're just making them basically having no other choice but going from hackathon to hackathon. I call it hackathon hopping. To get some money here, to get some funding there, to use public funding and so on. And it's not a sustainable strategy. So I was just calling my colleagues here to be cautious in the way we are promoting it, because there is so much that a hackathon can do. Europe is facing this challenge. US has passed the trend of hackathon. I think we need a more sustainable and comprehensive strategy for that.
I agree. And that's actually a huge point and good stuff, because when you have these hackathons, you definitely have these corporate entities coming in, or even like these well-meaning, maybe Silicon Valley entities coming in and paying, pennies on the dollar for work that's actually pretty critical and huge. And there's never like a path. Well, there's not never, but oftentimes there's not a path to develop those skills further, to take those skills into an actual career path. And so, I would love to echo that. But I also think that we have to actively create these scenarios for ourselves, and then and force those companies and force those people to take notice. So for the blockchain space, I've tried to create this new standard formula at Celo at C Labs, wherein if we're doing a lot of transactions in a region like a Leapfrog Nation, we should be providing some kind of pathway towards technical leadership or community leadership in that same region. Otherwise, we just create new digital imperialism where we're just farming a whole people for their transactions. So we can say, look at my blockchain, look how many transactions we have in this country or that country. And so I think a hackathon does provide a good pathway towards, okay, what do we have as far as technical talent in this region? And how can we pair a hackathon to develop technical talent with the fact that we're already doing a lot of transactional volume in that region? And so it is a formula I kind of hope to see adopted. I haven't seen any other blockchain projects in the space taking that approach, but I think it's actually the most realistic for what we call these digital collectives that are somehow doing altruistic financial work around the world. And it's let's pair that with real change.
Yes, I think those are wonderful points. I think one area I know we wanted to cover is, where is that intersection between the public sector, governments, that is, and then the private sector? So everything from corporate training programs, in some cases that go directly to employment, through to private organizations that offer training for people to use their platforms or their tools, kind of as Nesh was describing. But where is that intersection between public sector and private sector? What are the motivations of public sector, which I think we all know, versus private sector corporates and companies? And how can they then effectively work together, given both their competencies and their motivations to really create greater efficiency and maybe rethink how the partnership evolves to reduce that digital gap, both in terms of the raw technical skills and what we've been talking about as far as the soft skills, the communications, the emotional intelligence, etc.
So if I could just take it on from here.
Yes.
What I've noticed in my experience is that we've had like a couple of governmental and non-governmental hackathons that have been done, especially in the lab that I was running. And they actually took these solutions, or the ones that won, and tried actually to develop them. The challenge that was there is that there was no real thought through or structure to figure out how to mentor them and also help the people that were developing these solutions pivot to the actual right solution that fits, whether it's this government or that or the non-governmental organization. So there needs to be a way in which the hackathons are also resold to the private sector and to government, to know that it's not just a hackathon, there's some mentorship, there's some way in which other industry players need to come and help you solve the real challenge. And then from where I was sitting also, there was challenges of actually having the tools to be able to do it, right? So we're talking about, so where I was working in IBM, we were giving tools for about 24 months for people to be able to actually utilize some of these solutions. And some of these things actually went through, there's only one real good scenario that, sorry, it's missing, it's not coming to my mind, but there's a financial solution that came to fruition through some of these processes. On the other side, I wanted to mention that from a Kenyan context, the Capital Markets Authority has set up an innovation sandbox, which now is, I think, the first sandbox in East Africa. And their first cohort of about 5 companies have already been admitted into that sandbox. So if we sort of take that sort of concept together of seeing how private sector and government is working, because what the sandbox was doing was bringing a lot of Capital Markets Authority, the regulators, the central banks all together to look at this technology and how it's being done and where the risks are. And then now, as you're seeing, about 7 of them have been admitted. So if we could be able to do some of these structures, especially in the various verticals, it really help. So those are points that I think we could help. Go ahead.
So if I may, so I am actually born in Ethiopia, but I live in the Netherlands for most of my life. So what I see, what the Netherlands does well is really the public-private partnership. And I think it's just part of their education system, starting from a young age, going to do your internship at the age of 14. Probably other European countries may do the same. But what works more is for them to understand that private sector is there to make sure that they recruit, develop, retain the best employees. And the role of the government is actually to prepare these youth to be the best they can be, right? So there's kind of clear understanding of what's expected of both of the entities. But what the missing sector is the NGOs actually. So we always talk about public-private partnership, but we seem to forget the role that the NGOs have played in the African continent as such. So what had happened in case of Ethiopia and most East African is that a lot of NGO took over the self-development sector. So youth getting this free training, and just like the hackathon hoppers, we have the NGO training hoppers, where people actually do not value curriculum outside of school, except if it's not offered for free. So this has been a culture for the last 60, 70 years. And it's becoming difficult for organizations like ours to grow because people do not value self-development as such. So that's actually, self-realization is something that we have to work on. That probably is the role of the government. It could be the role of, but I think the role of parents even is actually to educate your children to know that the education does not stop when you finish school. It's a day-to-day activity. I learn every day by being here. I learn a lot. So I think the mindset has to change. So that's one. And that's really not to exclude private sector from taking that responsibility, but it's to say that really self awareness of wanting to know more, to be exposed, to learn more, is something that has to develop in the cultures, and cultures like voluntarism. This is in the Netherlands is almost a thing. You know, you do it without you even realize that you do it. So outside of curriculum, what Rose was trying to talk about is actually something like that. It's not like going on YouTube, finding all the education you can get and pretend you are Harvard certified educated person, but really to say, you know, what can I add to what kind of value can I add to my community? And the private sector also should be prepared to accommodate that. What doesn't happen in Ethiopia is most of private sectors are not open to even offer unpaid internship. If you do go for internship, you probably be ending fetching coffee for your bosses. So that's where actually things go wrong, is where you actually don't see the added value of an intern bringing something new into your organization, you know, new insight into. So that's where the at that level should the private sector be prepared to invest in youth. And it also is because companies have not seen human capital as an asset. So it's something you hire and then they perform as much as they can, and you fire them whenever you want. So I think that's something that we have failed in investing, to understand that human capital is actually the best investment you have, and it's as an asset. So self-realization, again, from the government, the private sector point of view. In order to do that, you need all partners to improve the private sector in performing responsibly. Also helping government institutions to educate youth according to their expectations. So that's why you need the intersection. So what is the skills that we need? So if you want to promote ourselves to be the best engineer, country providing, so you have to work with engineering association, with engineering universities, to work to make sure that what skills are needed. And we need to learn to educate ourselves more. And I think that's what we can work towards. I hope I have made my points.
No, you made a lot of very interesting and valuable points, Rahel. Thank you. I think with all those motivations and all those, so many different goals that I think need to be addressed in some cases simultaneously. So one aspect I wanted to just ask maybe a tactical question and get people's reaction on is, so in many cases, people are motivated by they need to be able to earn an income, and they need to be able to support their families, or in some cases support their parents, because maybe they're coming from a community that wasn't educated. I remember when I was initially working in India 20 years ago, we were hiring software engineers, and we asked them what their parents, where they were from, and their parents were subsistence farmers. So this was like a major change in terms of the generational gap between someone whose parents were subsistence farmers and someone who's working in a technology organization with multiple global customers. So how do we, when we look at education, we look at education that's potentially at no charge, and education that people have to pay for, like a corporate training program or a specific skill set. They go and learn this technology so they can get employed. What techniques do people feel have been effective, especially in Africa? Are there schemes like income sharing, where in some cases the training is at no charge, but then they pay maybe 17-20% of their subsequent income back to the training company? In some cases, there are corporate training programs run by companies, which I've seen, and this has occurred in India and in other parts of Asia as well, where a large company might literally train high school graduates in very specific skills. So they actually come out not with the general education that they pay for at a university or at a training program, but specific corporate training when they're required to work for that employer for 4 years or 5 years, kind of like the military almost, or like et cetera. So do schemes like that, do programs like that, how effective do we think they could be? Could they be expanded with the help of the public sector? Or are there other programs that I think allow people to value their training and then thereby be effective in terms of practical day-to-day skills?
I think that there's a desire for that kind of a relationship to be had, and the issue there is to trust that it can be maintained. Kind of to Desiree's point earlier, there's quite a few examples of people who do like coding incubators. So you have like a coding boot camp, and the idea being that out of 1,000 of you that apply, 100 of you get chosen, and you get laptops, and you get to learn how to code and all these things. But in reality, you then get funneled into basically doing work for, you know, New York-based, California-based tech companies, or even like some graphic designers at the same situation, right? They're developing those skills, and they get funneled into those working situations where they're then paid pennies to do work that should be quite a bit higher of a salary. So then when we talk about like these kind of extended programs, right? You have an employer that can then go to the poorest regions, essentially farm human capital, and then has a guaranteed 4 years with that human. So it becomes kind of like indentured servitude once again, while using digital means as the argument for bettering their life. When and I want to kind of push back on the previous part of this comment that we were talking about, which is I do think that we can see quite a bit of change in people's lives by allowing them to educate themselves on YouTube and on the internet. But we are talking about regions that have about 17% internet penetration from a whole population standpoint. So we actually haven't seen necessarily the youth and the general population, especially the parents, and especially those who have expectations of the youth, get exposed to this world of open shared information and desire for these new skills, these soft skills, and these communal like gatherings and coming together. So I think that I'm a little bit hesitant to ever let a corporation or a private entity kind of come in and say like, we're gonna create this system where you are like almost indentured to us. I'm sure a lot of it is done with the best of intentions, but also it's always maintained with the idea of supporting the bottom line, in my opinion.
And if I may jump in, what we're actually currently doing is we're actually working with government universities in Ethiopia that we believe we could relate to because of their focus in technology space. And our initiative is to actually provide training while the students are still in school, provide additional training so that at the end of their school program, they would be employable. We will avail jobs for them, but at the same time, that skill set could be used even for themselves personally, or if they wanted to be employed elsewhere. We just want to develop talent before they actually finish school. So that kind of stuff, in my view, the private sector has an interest, and that private sector need to be incentivized. There has to be some kind of outcome for itself and in a big picture for the country or for the youth overall in our area. So it can't just be about personal interest or company interest. It has to be a bigger interest in mind. What I'm seeing, in other places, I've seen in, for example, in Vietnam. In Vietnam, pretty much all of their investments, they have a development agenda they call people-centered development. So they have KPIs in place where every investment, any company who's investing in their country will have to have some people development purpose. A lot of it involves training. So a lot of those trainings would be, reusable even outside of that company's scope. So that's kind of helping develop their team, their people. I've also seen in Ireland a more organized effort. They have a program called the Young Enterprise. So what their program does is it captures kids since 10-year-old kids, very young kids, up to 14, 15-year-old kids. They have a very structured program countrywide that's kind of incentivizing them, teaching them about product development, service development, how to write a business proposal, how to run your own company, what kind of structure a typical business would have, that kind of skills, and actually partners with universities, including big universities such as Harvard and Oxford, which we could do the same thing in Africa with our own universities, right? And they've been very successful. Some of the kids that come out of there actually end up visiting. They are one of the top talent I've seen. Some of their sales pitches is just unbelievable. Their product development ideas is just brilliant. So they are creating a way for folks to create jobs for themselves and be able to be employable if they wanted to join an existing corporation. I've also seen in India and some Southeast Asia countries, Central Europe, Eastern Europe countries like Poland and Estonia. And what they're doing is they understand the need for private sector involvement, especially in the professional services sector. Because, you know, unlike a manufacturing space where you can scale by adding automation, in professional services space, you grow by adding people because you're just effectively selling people's time. So one way they're doing it is they're establishing infrastructure, they're incentivizing some private sector companies to come in and be able to add value, and there's a requirement to coach the youth, to coach the entrepreneurs. There's an expectation clearly mandated. So that collaboration is increasing the youth development and the entrepreneurs development as well.
All right. And actually adding to that, another factor is that there's a perceived risk in training the youth simply because, as you're saying, you might invest in this young person at, their high school or secondary learning level or when they're in campus. And at the point that they appreciate a level of self-discovery or self-interest, then they leave the organization. And that is not as desired then as before, because one of the glaring statistics about youth in Africa is that the average population in terms of age is 19. So this will force many organizations to rethink recruiting and what that will mean for someone who is, half your workforce is at a certain age. They haven't developed those skills anyway. So at what point do you really get to build or tap into their aspirations, tap into their passions, and position your organization as one that they would prefer to work for a period of time? And having your organization then positioned as one that combines both social and economic impact, because then we have trends that are said to be unique to millennials, that someone will leave an organization not because of how much they're getting in per month, but because they don't feel like their work is meaningful. They do not feel like their work is actually making impact in the society. So these metrics then on the social side are not only for the youth, but also for corporates to rethink, how do we get to tap into the best and actually connect to the aspirations of this generation in a way that is sustainable on both ends? Because it's not, it's one thing to encourage organizations and government to put these programs in place, and they will, because there is that, there's an upgrade, there's a uniform respect toward the aspect of social capital. But on the other hand, then among the youth, then which voices are pronounced in terms of addressing which concern areas are, vital to address as per time? Because if we, for instance, look at one graduation class as per the next, their concerns might be similar. Space this by even 2 years, then the concerns could be different, right? So for instance, in Kenya, then I came across a statistic that the average graduate will look at least 5 years before they can get, meaningful work or into an established work position, right? And when someone looks at a fact like this and sees their peers who have, quote unquote, tarmacked and try to get work opportunities, could not get work opportunities, they've tried to be part of these programs and could not get, universally applicable skills to other industries, then we're forced to actually rethink then what will truly work for this, this young demographic that is integrating itself into a world that's dynamically changing. And this again, bearing in mind the exposure to the 4th/5th industrial revolution, a lot of concepts are not they're not, so to speak, in the public domain. So therefore, as one of the panelists had pointed out, one generation of parents is in a completely different career field than what their children are doing. So if we speak of, for instance, the age of the influencers, the digital marketers, and people who are in the content field and their parents were not, then what kind of support do they get? What platforms do we have then to merge this skill set into a way that we don't just look at the gaps in terms of institutional learning, but also peer-to-peer learning, and then just the rapid dissemination of both skill and expertise among youth.
Just to add up on, I think when I was talking about involving private sector, it's not as such. So first of all, we have to think about scalability. So if you are only working on a program for Coca-Cola, you probably have 100 people being hired by Coca-Cola. So I think the focus should also be on small and medium enterprises, which are the backbone of the economy, which are the one that would be absorbing most number of the employment. Okay, if you are talking from employment side of. On the other side, so when I read, I used to give lecture when I go back to Ethiopia at university, and the books that we use in Ethiopia are similar to the books I have here, but none of them are related to the Ethiopian context. So if I give, for instance, we talk about pricing and inflation, and then they take Big Mac as inflation corrector. So they say if the Big Mac price is, the typical Kotler book, and then when I go back to my home, I'm like, it does not make sense because none of Ethiopians actually have ever visited McDonald's. How would they even know what it means? So what I meant by involving private sector is actually to contextualize the content of the study they are actually getting. So the case study should be something about Mercato, which is the biggest market in Africa. So we have to understand how an entrepreneur actually defines his pricing strategy. Is it based on China's price, or is it really based on, well, my neighbor is pricing his price higher, so I do it differently? So that's actually how the internal economy should be developed, because you are serving the same need. But you can't do that if your education is correcting you in the eyes of the Steve Jobs and Elon Musk, which are inspiration for most of us, but they are unattainable dreams. So it would be very good to actually look at the local solution, the local problems, and then you develop the problem-solving skills that is really needed for the community, rather than aspiring to become the Facebook of the future, where it is actually nice to have, but the reality is, everyday businesses are the one building the economy. Someone who is buying something from one shop and selling for additional price. I think these skills are easier to adapt because people can relate to his neighbor coming from a rural area going to a main city and making it elsewhere than someone somewhere you see at a TikTok shop. So that was what I meant by including the private sector mindset, understanding how they work. That's, I think, how we actually have to prepare our employees, unless we are actually preparing them for global jobs, which probably we'll be discussing about digital jobs. But in reality, most of them actually are attaining jobs in Africa. So let them be prepared for African market.
Right, let them be prepared for their local environment, not necessarily just for the global outsourcing jobs. And that, I think, is a challenge everywhere, because it's especially that when you look at the urban-rural gap. Desiree, I think you have several different points that might be interesting to share with everyone here, ranging from kind of the funding aspects and the development partners through to kind of some of the techniques on education strategies. So please go ahead.
Thanks. Just to clarify, what I'm sharing here is my personal opinion, so I'm not speaking in the name of any organization and so on. But I think that I got pretty good at analyzing things with high-level perspective. And what I've identified as some of the gaps that we can fill and fix in the African context is, for example, the source of funding. It can be public, private, a combination of both, or coming from development partners. All are valid, but they often come with strings attached. So we need to identify, based on the needs, what do we want to have as an impact. If it's social impact for the population, for the citizen, then better going with public funding. But then also understanding that either the people implementing these different projects, specifically when it's about training on technology, entrepreneurship, or innovation, might lack the expertise because it costs to hire experts, and often our governments cannot afford it, which is completely understandable. But then, as it's been happening for maybe way too long, the expertise is imported. If we're lucky, we'll be importing this expert from Europe or US, who also comes from the country. So that person can relate to the citizen. That person can feel empathy, can be passionate, and can also work for free when needed, which won't happen if you hire consulting companies that is bound to KPIs and so on. If you only rely on private investment, then make sure that it's locally sourced funding, because the money coming from the place will then go back to the place through the citizen, the customers, and so on. I think that's what, I mean, I'm not here to tell what we should do or what we shouldn't do, but I think that what we could be adopting from the private sector is the requirement for KPIs, performance deliverables. I think way too often we tend to think that as long as there is a strategy and there is a hackathon organized or there is an incubation program. I run several incubation programs, so I'm the first to criticize the inefficiency that I could contribute to deliver. It works for 3 months, but then what do we do afterwards? Often we're limited with the funding because the partners we got in the event were only bound to the duration of the event, and we then discuss enough the next step afterwards. I think we have a lot of potential in the country, but indeed, I completely agree with most of what has been said now. Too much emphasis is put on the technology, the business, and so on, not enough on the human science part of it, the design, the social aspect. In the future, if you think well, there'll be computers writing computer code. So AI will be fully automated. Blockchain will be fully automated. It's already automated. So the whole point is that the tomorrow's work market won't maybe rely so heavily on all the effort that we're putting in training armies of computer engineers and developers and so on. Let's try to train the next generation in what makes us unique, what makes us stand out. And I mean, the floor is open. I open the suggestion of what can be trained. But I personally, as a physicist, engineers, and so on, I'm the first to advocate that let's try to not focus too much on the tech aspect, because at the end of the day, people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it.
If I could jump in, I think there's a massive gap that's there between industry and the youth, and it's all about understanding what the industry requires. We've had quite a number of, there are two specific companies, I will not mention them, but have really invested in innovative labs and skills and whatever. In under a year, they've shut them down, right? So the question is why are they shut them down? Is because they're looking at it in terms of quarter-end reports. How are they going to be able to get money from it, and in that structure? So there needs to be some sort of incentives for these, even if these organizations, to have a midterm and long term of about 3 to 4 years on the midterm and about 6 years. A way of actually looking how to be able to deliver and thrive on this innovation. I'll tell you, some of those companies who were in fintechs had close to about 300 to 400 developers following them, and they had built up the skills over a year. And when it came to the next half year, it was disconnected, right? So you talk about our whole base that has been invested on knowledge of actually how to use, whether it's APIs, whether it's blockchain, whether it's whatever you want to talk about it within financial space, now cannot use it and have to now go and look for other opportunities. So I think there is a way in which government can actually play and lend a hand looking at it, especially from the context I was talking to you about, the sandbox perspective, but also in the various other, rolling that out and with that mindset through the other verticals that are there.
No, that's thank you. I think that's helpful. When we look at grants and aid money that come, and I think it's going back to the comment I believe one of us made on NGOs. I think maybe I'm not sure if it was Rahel who talked about kind of the role of NGOs. So NGOs come in all ways, shapes, and form, and sometimes there's like a political implication to some NGOs. Some of them are religious, some of them come with specific goals in mind. How do we look at grants that are coming in either in the form of aid, grants, or funding that comes in some cases from, it could be private sector financial institutions, it could be government organizations or the government directly. How it would be interesting to discuss kind of how the funding, where is the money going? Is it being channeled in the most efficient manner possible? The building of these innovation hubs and sandbox environments, which I think is very helpful, and you see that happening right here in New York City with the city of New York actually having set up a hub like that, or for blockchain in particular, actually, through to in all across Africa and Asia. Do we see those models working? How do we see that funding working? How efficient is it? How valuable is it?
Well, so I don't know, my background, actually, I studied MBA and specialized on social enterprise. So I've done a lot of research around, and my first company was actually advising corporates to be more sustainable, and also to advise NGOs to become more business model driven than program driven. So I've had my share of discussion with NGOs, and I do understand some of the concept of NGOs. So generally, NGOs are not redundant. There are sectors which do not have a business model where someone wants to pay for. That's infrastructure, that's education, water irrigation, a lot of those. However, in area of like digital jobs, I mean, digital working hubs, the business model is still very complicated for developed countries, even, so there needs to be understanding that some way, somehow, in the beginning of the first startup phase for investment, businesses do not have opportunity to attract investment. So, but it should never be to say, I'm going to write my business plan to get the first funding as much as possible, or to get the first grant. You see, so there must be a phase. So we also have an incubation program that we work on. And most of the people who actually join, they join because they think, oh, they will invest, they will give us grants. But if that's the understanding of an entrepreneur from day one, he will or she will not succeed. So I think that's when the NGOs have to make a very good understanding is this is just a stepping stone for you to grow as an entrepreneur, and you need some push because the government does not have, the conducive atmosphere like in Europe. For us, if we want to start a business, there's 2 years long. Then we have mentorship, we can access investment. So it's a very different stage, whereas someone in Ethiopia doesn't. So that's one thing. And that should be from both sides. So the NGOs should also understand that they will have to become redundant at one point. Because if you have to do the same thing over and over again with grants, it means your business model is not right. So what it means is that you have to first themselves to find other way of investing, and they have to find a way to kind of have a business model behind it. So one of the things that have been tried and what's worked with revolving funds. So revolving funds are funds that are actually borrowed at zero interest, and then they are paid back to the NGOs, and the NGO can reinvest. And it works in South Asia, in a lot of North America countries and South American countries. It actually does work. So giving out money just for no reason does not give the trigger for entrepreneurs to perform. And that's what Desiree was saying. Like, we have to understand, the KPI. What is the KPI for a startup to actually function to want to perform himself, outperform his competitor. If it's given to me for free with no string attached, why would I have to perform? I can actually go to another NGO to do so. I think this is the two sides of understanding. Both sides have to have a KPI of performance, and I think that's when we need actually the NGOs. But you cannot expect an NGO to create future entrepreneurs, because NGOs are not entrepreneurs in that sense. So there is where they need to be working with private sector specialists, experts of all fields, to actually run programs. And I think what Silas was saying, it closed down because there was no sustainability idea behind it. And without working with the government, with the private sector, I don't think such a program can be run efficiently and be good enough for everybody.
I do want to put a plug in for what we're seeing in the actual blockchain world is a lot of these decentralized autonomous organizations. So there are a lot of DAOs popping up, and I think that there is something that comes with that, which is like this collective attitude. So while I totally agree with Rahel and that there needs to be like that coalition to exist, I think a third arm is actually coming from this like decentralized communities that around the planet that are interested in seeing growth in these sectors and in these regions. And so they're coming together and creating these DAOs, decentralized autonomous organizations, to help bootstrap that, but also to honestly to provide a sense of belonging to those people that are in those regions. And I think that's actually the real one of maybe what Rahel's point is getting at further, which is that these students and these people and these youth have to actually feel like they belong to a mission, belong to a purpose-driven desire to create change in these specific ways. And this is their role within that change. And so I do think that there might be some of that magic and some of that kind of beauty that's lost when you get disillusioned and you just get thrown into a corporate atmosphere without maybe that sustained sense of community. So I want to just put a plug in for those DAOs and even like these open source blockchain networks to get involved and create that catalyst as well.
Thank you, Nesh. Anyone else, any comments on this? I had one final topic otherwise. And I know we're, and I welcome kind of topics on the space that others can bring as well. Berhanu, did you want to share something?
Yeah, I would like to add on, when it comes to funding sources, whether it's decentralized or some of these well-organized NGOs, what I feel is governments need to channel the private sector, the entrepreneur, the youth's interest and structure it, because you're dealing with sometimes an organized entity, so they need to channel that. They need to engage the entrepreneurs, the private sector, and the youth, and understand what they need, and put more governance around it, more KPIs, to facilitate interest of the youth and the entrepreneurs in dealing with the private, in dealing with the NGOs and external financial sources. So there's a need for government to play a part in this, not leaving the individual entrepreneur who doesn't have a lot of awareness about how these NGOs work, and leveraging government's collective power to kind of channel a collective interest for the youth and for the entrepreneurs.
Can I share a quick anecdote here about Rwanda and the way the country, by inviting the first company actually that was doing drone for medical transport, they worked hand in hand to then build the regulation and policies that then has been adopted by many countries, including the home country of that startup that came from Silicon Valley. So what I'm trying to invite maybe those who will be listening to this talk is, I was part of a panel of regulators who talked about sandbox and about the regulatory framework and so on, that we wait and see, but understanding that there is rush to do something about it. Nigeria, as understood, is the third trading place of cryptos in the world. Kenya, I read an article lately, has the 5th rank in terms of Bitcoin holding, but none of these countries have regulation that is related to crypto trading and so on. So how about regulators, decision makers, doing what we've done with drone and maybe working with these companies to create tomorrow's regulation for crypto trading and everything related to blockchain, so that instead of being just consumer and not getting any benefits from it, while officially trading cryptos is forbidden in these countries, we'll be actually creating the policies and regulation that can then be implemented in developed countries, including those in Europe, US, and America, and so on. So that for once, maybe we'll be doing it proactively, not waiting for regulation to come from elsewhere and being copy-paste regardless of the context, but really taking the chance that the current environment is inviting these kind of disruptors. They see Africa as a market. So let's see how we can leverage on that to then turn into maybe from consumer to producer.
You muted again, Ravi.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Desiree. You actually led into kind of, I think, one of the final questions we wanted to discuss, which is the direct role of governments and regulations and the legal structure in different countries, and how maybe even an organization like us, all of us here on this panel, and Afro Valley as a whole, can potentially start to bring, in terms of recommendations to the government. So not just necessarily for crypto regulations, which is certainly an important component, but really digital regulations as a whole, and regulations for allowing, be it entrepreneurs or be it just folks who don't want to be entrepreneurs, who work in this new age, in this new economy, allow for the creation of digital hubs, and allow for the creation of new value through reforms in the education system. So there are probably reforms in the government, in government regulations, ranging from education to taxation through to finance, et cetera, and really across a spectrum that need to comprehensively be looked at. And it can range the full thing from what the US state of Wyoming might be attempting to do, or the state of Florida might be attempting to do, through to what Estonia did about 10, 15 years ago, that's really built up an interesting, thriving economy, through to what some of the larger countries like China and India are attempting to do in some way, shape, or form, with India building like an India Stack, a whole development platform that the private sector can use. So I wanted to open up really the conversation on what are some direct steps or recommendations that we could provide to the actual governing bodies, the actual governments in different countries in Africa, or frankly, Pan-Africa.
All right. I think one of the best ways to get that done really is to invite collaboration, and not just collaboration, in the, by word, but by having actual platforms like sandboxes, because I believe, or I would say, and I think that sandboxes are the quickest way to get things into practice, because there are already existing frameworks, proposals that have been done, journals that have been written, articles that are in the public domain. There are, a lot of research has already been done in the last 3 years about, these areas actually being solved. But when you come into practice, then there are not enough on rails and off rails then where people can actually implement these ideas and get the government grants and funding. Because, for instance, you would say that, your startup has signed up for these programs, has gotten some level of mentorship, but in terms of scalability, then you weren't able to get the right partnerships to scale to other regions within your country, for instance. So the question is then, how many or how soon can we get not just national platforms where these sandboxes can be, can actually get the light of day and get the support that they need, to also international frameworks that then can get different nations collaborating in such a way that if I in Kenya want to extend my solution and my services to Ethiopia, then there should be frameworks whereby I should be able to apply and actually get, support on the ground, so that if, for instance, my solution was not ideally meant for, a specific Kenyan context or community, then perhaps it has its home in another country. And being able to circulate this, this creation of innovation then should be an encouragement in such a way that you don't have solutions that are built by entrepreneurs dying at the idea stage or dying at the point that they were not able to scale market. It should be that if my company closes down because of either reasons of revenue or reasons of the team or reasons of the commonly known problems or hindrances to startups actually crossing their first year, it should be that this knowledge shouldn't be lost to myself or lost when I go to another industry to get other work opportunities. It should be that these sandboxes create open repositories of both knowledge, skill, and reference so that another country can pick up and not have to reinvent the wheel. Because one of the challenges then that both governments and private sector plus entrepreneurs and youth do see is that once a business fails, what happens? We don't ask that. We tend to report and state that entrepreneurs or small businesses, SMEs, will probably be shut within the first 5 years. That statistic needs to be defined, that this particular business or this particular business model could not work in a specific context for a specific reason, such that if pivoted or built upon by another group in another country or in another context, could actually succeed. And therefore, we build a repository then that can accelerate both business growth and skill development really for the continent.
Just to add on to that point, I think it's very interesting that, especially from the Kenyan context, even though we have the sandbox in place, I can't say that there's been real structure to hand over some of the innovation. So everybody knows that Kenya has been the home of M-Pesa, which was a revolutionary solution. And unfortunately, I was about 10, 15 years ago, and no real structure was actually put together in place to be able to help foster innovation to come through. So right now, if you're looking at M-Pesa being now one of the biggest leaders in Kenya, right now in the sandbox, we have a particular solution based on cryptocurrency and blockchain that's been blocked to actually go through, right? So there's some, and that's a hard fact. So you need to look at the whole aspect of those structures need to be really concretized and really developed so that they can be something that we can now start moving across, especially the same way that we're going through to the same way Estonia has done. On the other dimension of the failures on SMEs and startups, I think that's where a lot of and throughout the whole cycle, academia really needs to be able to pick up from there and be able to give those deep insights of how is it that this organization failed, why did they fail, and that should be a rich set of information that can come to the next line of entrepreneurs and developers, and even possibly to the people who actually are near failing or about to fail, to be able to pivot themselves into the right direction.
And if I may, right now, my experience actually studying Dengane in Ethiopia was that there's a lack of connectivity, as you know, in Africa and specifically in Ethiopia. And if we're looking to develop the workforce of the future in the digital space, we need to have the infrastructure in place. At this point, I thought infrastructure was just connectivity. I had to go back to basics. We actually didn't have electrification to begin with. So in Africa, in general, electrification rate is under 50%. It's around 43, 45%. And what that actually means is you just have a light in the house. That's the number we're counting. If we're looking for an actual electrification that would support, digitization, that's significantly lower number. So if you're looking for an inclusive way to define the future jobs in the digital space, you need to address those basic things, right? So to facilitate the youth to develop as a workforce inclusively, you need to have safe spaces, right? Where you don't have any electricity, you don't have any internet. You need to have those digital hubs in the country, outside of the main cities, so that folks can congregate, have a place where they can access the internet, access some training, have some learning opportunities. So you need those infrastructures in place to facilitate what would happen in the future. In the meantime, for entrepreneurs in the cities who usually congregate in the cities, they also need a safe space where they can actually take off. So for year 1 and 2 is the biggest struggle. For those, governments could step in. So have facilities that they can rent effectively, but be fairly reasonably priced, have redundancy in electricity and internet. Folks can actually pay for and rent that would support their businesses. So having those kind of facilities would, in the current time where we don't have sufficient electricity, reliability, and internet, it would serve as a safe space where entrepreneurs can kind of pick up, and in the countryside, having those digital hubs for the youth to participate in this digital evolution.
Thank you, Birhanu. Rahel, I don't know if you had any final points that you wanted to share. And I know we're kind of hitting time, so I definitely want to thank anyone. But Rahel, did you have some final points on tax or investments that might be helpful to share with everyone?
Yes. Well, you saw my making notes. So, I mean, most of the things have been said, thankfully. There are a few things, we have to focus on, the topic of digital jobs and gig economy. And I think we have a very good opportunity for Africa. It's not to claim that, we have talked about the lack of HR and so forth, but the culture had conditioned Africans to actually welcome gig economy. The majority of our economy depends on informal sector, which means everybody, 80% of people actually after graduation have to kind of try out entrepreneurship somewhere, somehow. So it means we are less bound to a lot of regulation, which are now being imposed for you, an organization like Uber or Upwork, where people actually have to have things in place, which does not be a big problem for Ethiopia or other African countries, because it's part of our life. So it's easier to impose simplistic way of regulation. So I hope anybody who is listening in the legal aspect of the government do not consider the way the West actually is treating gig economy, which is very new to the development of the human capital in this side. So that's one. Second, I think we have to think about leaving out the legacy. So the legacy meaning the infrastructure that had been built in the past in banks and other ICT organizations actually are becoming redundant, and it's becoming a big obstacle for them to grow, because they have invested immensely in a very big hardware investment, which are, in India, in other places, and Africans do not have. And I remember I cannot pronounce her name well, Ngozi. She said, we have not built it well. Why don't we start building it the right way? Which means anything you build, you can start from the way we are. And it's not to talk about the leapfrogging we are going through with all the challenge it has, but it really is true that we can actually rely on existing platforms now and build the digital economy we are talking about. But having said that, we have to think about how to include the rural economy.
Yes.
So, digital jobs are created. It has to be for inter-Africa communication. It cannot be that we are now suddenly saying the rural employees are actually serving Google. It's just not realistic enough. So, but we have the opportunity to serve the African countries, because recently we have entered the African Continental Trade-Free Zone. Let's utilize this opportunity to serve one another. So why not why not my employee from Ethiopia serve someone in Kenya, and vice versa, than actually trying to position ourselves as Africa to be an outsourcing destination, which also requires some time. But for a short run, I think let's try to focus with intercontinental trade and utilize the availability of legacy-based challenges that others are having. So I hope I made my point in this, and thank you.
Yes, thank you. And I think that helps kind of bring up everyone in a more equitable manner, which I think is the goal, as opposed to just individual urban and digital hubs. Thank you, everyone, for your wonderful feedback and time and wonderful insights. Birhanu, Roslyn, Nesh, Rahel, Silas, and Desiree. I wanted to thank Afro Valley for organizing the entire event and this particular panel. Hopefully, this event will obviously be available for viewing again. I think there's a lot of interesting feedback. I intend to watch again just to capture some of the key points. And then I know there are some ongoing events as this conference ends, so please continue to participate in that. So I think I will be closing at this point, so we can all leave the studio. Thank you again.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Everyone.
Bye bye.